Have any questions, come up and see me after this second plenary. I am delighted to be able to introduce our panel today. The topic is possibilities of and challenges to protecting both religious freedom and human dignity for all. And we have on our panel Ganoun Diop from the United States. He is the Director of Public Affairs and Religious Liberty for the Worldwide Seventh-day Adventist Church. And before his election in July of 2015, he was the church's liaison to the United Nations, and as its representative within the international community of civic and political leaders. We have Tor Lindholm, who is an emeritus professor of philosophy at the Norwegian Center for Human Rights at the University of Oslo. He is a board member of the Oslo Coalition on Freedom of Religion or Belief and a member of the Human Rights Committee of the Church of Norway. And then we have Christopher Tollefson from the College of Arts and Sciences, a distinguished professor and department chair in the Department of Philosophy at the University of South Carolina. He did his doctoral studies at Emory University and has taught in Ghana. My name is Jane Wise, and I am an associate director of the center. So we will let these participants, these panel participants, have about 20 minutes each for their presentation, and that will give us time for questions at the end. So I will turn the time over to you, Ganoun.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to present on a topic that, well, I can say whose time has come. I would like to thank Cole Durham and Brett and all the organizers for this opportunity. Brett, you will excuse me, but this morning I think you asked a question about how dignity, human dignity, could be construed or defined. And you mentioned that for many people this is impossible or irrelevant, and even someone declined an invitation precisely because this seems to be irrelevant. So this is my opportunity to maybe just pick up there and respond to your question. I'm going to talk about human dignity as foundation for not only human rights, but also human responsibilities. The meaning of dignity, let me start with that, today would surprise our modern ancestors, a recent writer has said. And he continues, I quote, "For us, dignity, that is human dignity, refers to the fundamental moral worth or status supposedly belonging to all persons equally. It is correspondingly a precious concept, especially in Western society." And he continues, "It marks a line in the moral sand that most of us think would never be crossed. Oppressed and marginalized people cry out on behalf of dignity. Humanitarian organizations lobby in its name, and state constitutions around the word dignity as the explicit grounds of their most fundamental entitlements and protection. Now, human dignity, true, is rarely defined. Some even advance that there can be no exact agreed upon definition. Of course, I respectfully disagree. True, the complexity of our topic is connected, among other things, to the fact that dignity is not a property among other empirical data. Dignity is rather the transcendental ground, usually taken as such, for the fact that human beings have rights and duties, but most of the time not defined. Nevertheless, though considered a slippery term, and in spite of its fluidity, the concept of human dignity seems to enjoy a convenient near consensus and a rallying point that mobilizes people of various interests and agendas, to the extent that most conventions, treaties, and covenants in the international arena evoke human dignity as a ground and justification for their own existence. Now, in an insightful article, Professor Heiner Bielefeld, the former UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of religion or belief, states, I quote, "Human dignity constitutes the very precondition for any normative interaction among human beings, within and among societies. At the same time, the concept of human dignity has a long history, and it strongly resonates within most religious and cultural traditions, including the Bible, the Quran, the work of Confucius or Stoic philosophy, to mention a few examples." He concludes, I quote, "This denotes the possibility that human dignity could become the center of an overlapping normative consensus shared by people from different religious or non-religious backgrounds who otherwise may continue respectfully to disagree on many questions of ultimate concern." Now, not to leave this reflection to an academic level, at existential level, we know human dignity is not just a theory. It is verifiable in the way people live, function, and relate to one another in society. There are implicit expectations among human beings, all of which are directly based in the presuppositions and assumptions connected to human dignity. First, human dignity is actually the justification and foundation for justice. I think the presentation last evening was, significant illustration of that. After all, people are not brought to court because they hunt and kill animals. The law allows it under certain circumstances. But beyond murder, which is clearly forbidden in any rule of law, consider, for example, cannibalism. It is not just forbidden anywhere today, everywhere, I should say. Cannibalism creates revulsion in our being. It is horrible and disgusting precisely because it deeply violates human dignity. There is a sense of solidarity in the refusal to tolerate such despicable and simply inhumane practice connected to human dignity. Another unacceptable reality because of human dignity is, for example, the inflicting of pain to children, the reduction of children to sex slaves, or the ripping off and collection of children's organs for trafficking. These inhumane crimes deeply offend our humanity. Why? I submit to your consideration because of human dignity. In fact, furthermore, human dignity is also connected to the idea of freedom of religion or belief. And I think this conference, in an inspired way, have brought these two together, not by chance. Even though transgressed in many quarters and countries, freedom of religion or belief is inseparably connected to human dignity. One of the incontrovertible aspects of freedom of religion or belief is actually freedom from being persecuted, yes. Freedom from being intimidated, harmed, or hurt because of one's beliefs or convictions. It is freedom from being inflicted pain, tortured, or murdered because of one's beliefs. But why is that so? I submit to your consideration, it's because of human dignity. There is then another dimension to freedom of religion or belief with deep connections to human dignity. See, freedom of religion or belief is like a compound freedom, because it is connected to freedom of thought, freedom of choice, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience. But why is it so important? Because it is what makes human beings sacred beings, conscience. That is what distinguishes us from anybody else or any other creature, if you allow me to frame it this way. Now, and I'll come back to this shortly. A positive freedom connected to human dignity is the freedom to enjoy peace as physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and social integrity. And when I say social integrity, I mean by this freedom from not being discriminated against, or freedom for not being criminalized because you believe differently. So freedom of religion or belief then is also freedom from violence, which is a call, by the way, to the whole human family to renounce the violence of discrimination or criminalization rather of other people because they believe differently. Now allow me to go just beyond general statements on freedom of religion or belief to focus more on a faith-based perspective. And I have to commend you here at BYU, and very clearly yesterday you mentioned your intentionality in with the religious component of your engagement with law and religion. So human dignity is also a spiritual endowment. It's not just a value, by the way, to be ranked among other values. It is the principle which undergirds all other values. As a matter of fact, all members of the human family, are entitled to this principle, which is the basis of all healthy relationship. No wonder this has been called, as in the case of the previous special rapporteur, an overlapping normative consensus. Both secular and religious world agree on this foundation. In fact, Immanuel Kant referred to it in his reflections on moral or categorical imperatives. All main religious traditions have clearly underlined its incontrovertible and pivotal position. Just briefly, the Second Vatican Council text entitled Dignitatis Humanae is explicit about its critical importance. The Orthodox Christian tradition has profound statements regarding human dignity, one of which specifies, by the way, that the face of God is even seen in the dignity of a stranger. But there is something more. Human dignity is also connected to this idea that humans are created in the image of God. But what does it really mean that humans are created in the image of God? The text could be translated in Hebrew as humans are created as image of God. Interestingly, in ancient temples, usually the image of the divinity was located in temples to convey the idea that the divinity is represented. But by saying that humans are created in the image of God, there is here something really profound about the sacredness of human beings, just like temples. Of course, this has been stated explicitly in the New Covenant, New Testament, when the Apostle Paul compares humans to temples of the Holy Spirit, for example. But human dignity takes it, I think, a step further, especially in the teachings of Jesus. Allow me to say, I really consider Jesus a genius in the way he taught about human dignity. People were focusing on justice, but he came deliberately focusing on more than justice, righteousness. And this is explicit, for example, in the Gospel of Matthew. He told his disciples, you have that if your righteousness does not surpass that of the scribes and of the Pharisees, you shall by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. And interestingly, he then goes on to illustrate what he means by righteousness, more than justice. Justice demanded, you shall not murder, and this is how he framed it. You have heard it was said, you shall not murder. But he says, I tell you, whoever is angry against his or her brother is liable to court. Same destination. But he goes even further. Whoever insults his brother or sister by saying raka or imbecile actually deserves to go to the Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin of the time. And then he adds, whoever tells fool to anyone deserves to be thrown in a garbage dam. But so justice demanded not to murder, but he goes further. Human dignity should take us at a deeper level of respect of every human being. No insult, no despising of anyone. Actually, if people have something against you, he say, leave there your offering. I'm not interested in your worship. Go first. Reconcile. That is what he calls righteousness. But why all that? Because of the dignity of human beings. Actually, the last of these antitheses was that you have heard, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But he said, but I tell you, in other words, justice allowed the love of neighbor, but hatred of enemies. But he say, no, my righteousness takes this to another level. I don't tell you to love just your neighbor, but even your enemies. And that's the basis of the new covenant. So he really takes human dignity to another level, looking at other people the way God looks at them as foundation for dignity. Interestingly, if really humans are made in the image of God, that means that the God who is praised and worshipped as worthy dignity created humans in his image, then he also endowed dignity as reflecting God's communicable attributes. Yes, human dignity is in fact a mystery, as God is a mystery. And allow me to, before concluding, just to say this. If humans are created in God's image, and that is the foundation of dignity, this means that God as mystery correlates with human nature as mystery. Human beings are not just biological beings, they are mystery. There's something in human that transcends any analysis. As God is in a fellowship, so human beings are created for fellowship then. For Christians who believe in the incarnation and identification, that too brings, in the name of human dignity, a solidarity that is a calling in the book of Proverbs to demonstrate God's profound solidarity with human beings because of human dignity. It is said, and I quote, whoever oppresses a poor insults his maker, but he who is generous to the needy honors him. And then in Proverbs 17:31, whoever mocks the poor insults his maker. And, you know, in the book of Zechariah, whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye. And Jesus saying, whenever you did this to the least of my brothers, you did it to me. Identification, dignity, with the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, the prisoner. And also, the love, if God is love, then humans created in his image have the vocation to love. if God is generous to be blessings to others, then humans also are called to be generous and blessings to others. May I open a parenthesis and again commend the church, and I'm not going to make the same mistake as my friend called Durham. I will not say Mormons. I will say the Church of Jesus Christ. Allow me just to say, and I commend you deeply, not only because you have invited me here to share these moments, but also in reading, in learning more about your story. There was a time when persecuted, you left the East, New York, and then to Missouri, and then to Utah. It was very tempting that you continue to isolate yourself. But God has blessed you. And from 1985, if I understand the story correctly, this was during the Ethiopian famine, you decided to fast and use the money to send to people dying of hunger. And that started your charity, and maybe even was an impetus for you to go beyond, to know that you also have to share the blessings with other people. And maybe this is also one of those forms of blessings to organize this symposium. So thank you very much for that. God as model for blessing to others. And I can just say the same thing. God's justice, and more than justice, righteousness, because it's not just a legal. This is the quality of human beings that we're talking about. And again, if God is a model for peacemaking, how can we not be such? If God is the model of truth-telling, the same is our vocation. If God, within God's self, is unity in diversity, or diversity in unity, how can we be others and be intolerant towards one another? In conclusion, the foundational status of human dignity is undeniable. Human dignity is in fact the foundation of all other values in society, whether freedom, justice, or peace. It is also the foundation and the concept and reality of human rights. It is essential to understand human dignity as central to the ordering of society. In modern and postmodern pluralistic society, yes, it may be useful sometimes to articulate human dignity in secular terms, but these should not exclude the need to bring in the specific spiritual or religious traditions who could make significant contributions to this. All humans have the vocation to reflect God's attributes, participating in the life of God with the mandate to share and promote this life in a caring and a responsible manner, to develop a culture not only of human rights, by the way, but a culture of human dignity may greatly contribute to the building of a better world, a world more humane, a world more human in the first place. Thank you.
Tor, go ahead.
I have the floor. I just said without the loudspeaker working, I have the floor. Thank you, Jane. I was invited here to this plenary session, a big honor, on a very expansive, I would say huge subject matter. It's there behind us, behind me and in front of you. To put them in my words, my subject matter, which is put together based on the invitation I received, 2 items: the universal human right to freedom of religion or belief. Item 2, the concept or principle or value of inviolable and inherent human dignity. So, as we say, freedom of religion or religious freedom, briefly, and human dignity. But of course, the issue is not to praise them individually or collectively or together. The issue is for this seminar, for this symposium, to see how they are interrelated. And I now add something which is my particular interest as a human rights scholar in the framework of internationally codified human rights. In human rights instruments, that's the jargon of the lawyers, the treaty texts, and in the treaties, and I would say, to be a little more loose, in sound human rights doctrine. How are the two? Freedom of religion or belief, human dignity, how are they interrelated? My colleague here at my right side has said something which I fully approve of. And I am moved by them. They are, most of the things you said are truth. There are something I disagree with, perhaps, but mainly I agree. However, it does not solve the task if we set the task, how are these two items, human dignity, freedom of religion, how are they interrelated in a way which can make sense to the whole world? Not just to Protestant Christians like you and me, to Catholics too, probably, we'll hear, but for people who are non-believers or have very different beliefs. How about Muslims? How about Buddhists and so on? And how about people who couldn't care less about religion? That is the topic I want to address. Is there a meaningful way of understanding these two concepts that I have now identified and how they are interrelated, which could make sense and be even valid and convincing across the board of different religions and cultures in our world today? Here are my comments to that. The first thing I should say then is that according to international law and human rights, who are the holders of human rights? That should be an easy question. Well, the human right to freedom of religion or belief is held by each and every human being on this planet now, and I wouldn't say always, because there was a time when it makes no sense to speak about human rights. I don't think, for instance, that Socrates, one of the masters in my tradition, would think of human rights and had any. So it is not a trans-historical term. It is a historical invention, in one sense. Here I may disagree with my Catholic friend on that side. By humans. Human rights is an invention, and they were instituted and worked out and fleshed out. And I feel I'm pretty young, although I'm 77 years old. So I am a little older than human rights, because my human rights began, in my sense of it, as internationally codified human rights. They would begin with the Charter of the United Nations in 1945, but there is very little, we have heard this morning, detail in that. And then you had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights 3 years later, in 1948. This wonderful text, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, worked out by the Commission on Human Rights, and adopted unanimously, as we have heard, very late in night in the night, maybe it was in the early morning the next day. That's what I hear from Brett. On 10th December 1948 in Paris by the General Assembly. Since then, there has been huge progress, development in the business or the pursuit of codification, clarification, also bureaucratization of what human rights amount to. And myself, a philosopher, I learned from my colleagues who are jurists that it's a very respectable job that has been done within the many bodies at the universal or the global level, and within, at the European level, you have the European Convention on Human Rights, very much in line with the Universal Declaration, dating from early 1950s. You have, even earlier, an Inter-American Convention, I think to which the US never signed up, did it? But at least it is very respectable, and they have an apparatus of their own. There's an African Commission, and another African rights of human and rights of peoples. And there's even a Southeast Asian Human Rights Declaration of recent origin. And there is, of course, the Human Rights Declaration by the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation. This is the world, the real world of human rights codification that I want to address for a while. What are the possibilities for having an understanding of human dignity, such that human dignity, as you rightly say, is the foundation of human rights? And that human dignity can then be supported, embraced from the heartland of each of these different peoples. I have no difficulty with the Christian approach to this, since I am a Lutheran, evangelical Christian, very traditional in that way. And our church has, of course, embraced officially and very clearly the doctrinal body and the practice associated with it of internationally codified human rights. And as it was mentioned, we have a Human Rights Commission, which tries to, Human Rights Committee, of which I'm a member, and which supports human rights practices in Norway and worldwide with our bigger means. How about Muslims? I have mentioned it already before lunch in a smaller forum, but I now repeat that I am a member of what calls itself the Oslo Coalition on Freedom of Religion or Belief. It is a combination of an academic group at the Norwegian Center for Human Rights. We study, we teach, we promote understanding in Indonesia, in Pakistan, and very soon also in Myanmar, of what is the human right to freedom of religion or belief. We also produce scholarly study of reform within the Islamic tradition, the status of women, other matters. And now I should have mentioned already, when at the point where I am now, that the scholarly leader of the Oslo Coalition, she, a woman, she is a Muslim. She is a Norwegian convert out of Christianity to Islam, and she has been a very competent and a very important leader for our exercise. She has written a PhD about a matter how women in Western Europe ask muftis for advice in practical issues. And It's a very interesting dissertation. It's published now recently under the title "How Muslims Think," and the publisher wanted that title by Brill. But her approach is very careful. I say to her, why exactly is it that you as a Muslim can embrace human rights? I have quoted for her the passage of the Quran, which is always used by our common friend, Hashim Kamali, on what is the... Well, there is not one. There are very many scriptural passages in the Quran, in the Holy Quran, which is supportive of human dignity and human rights. Human dignity, maybe more than rights. And here is the favorite passage, chapter 17, verse 70. It is God in the royal plural speaking. We have bestowed dignity on the offspring of Adam, provided them with transport on land and sea, given them for sustenance things good and pure, and conferred on them special favors above a great part of our creation. When I, as a non-Muslim, quote an interpretation of a Quranic text, which can only actually be presented properly in Arabic, then of course I am doing something which may not be done. Only I do it because Muslim friends of mine say this is a very important passage for our support of human dignity, because the Arabic word is different from those we find in the Bible. Karama is well translated as dignity, so that humans have a special preference status in the creation, in God's creation, in Allah's creation, according to the Quran, is convincingly conveyed by that passage. The creation story in the first page of any Bible, God, I have bought a very unused Bible because it is bought here. I won't tell you the story. It is from Genesis, chapter 1, verse 27. I think most of you would know this, of course, but it should be read. And I read to you. So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. I just take that. This is reasonably interpreted by, I think, almost all churches as a grounding for respect of human dignity. But let me get to the main point here. What's the point about dignity? We can be pious and say it's very important, but that doesn't cut much wood, I suppose. If we want a Christian or Quranic or any kind of support of human rights on the basis of human dignity, then we need there are some criteria which has to be satisfied by our conception of human dignity. Here are my proposals for what we should demand. Human dignity should be defined such that each and every human being belongs on an equal footing to this normative status of having dignity. Created by God in his image, fine. Endowed with karama by God, fine. In the Quranic passage, it is very clear. Here I ask my Muslim friends, this applies to all human beings, not only to male, as different from female Muslims, not only to Muslims, but also to non-Muslims, not only to pious people, but to scoundrels, to criminal people. I mean, to have dignity doesn't require anything, because it's to speak in Christian language, it is a grace, it is a blessing, it is something which we have out of God's understandably infinite love. It is not something which we deserve, and so on. I should say one third, since we have some people who are interested in religion here. I have just found a very good passage on Martin Luther and his conception of human dignity. Because very often we hear that, well, it's difficult for the Lutherans to support human dignity because, yeah, of course, created by God, clear. But Lutherans are famous, and maybe infamous, for being sort of experts on sin. And when I meet some of my namesakes in this country, I hope I have some of them here that I can irritate, namely members of those who belong to the Missouri Synod. You have the feeling that you are in a temple, in the church, where you have experts on sin and hell. Martin Luther's approach is very different. He is very clear, I say, that created in God's image means something which cannot be done away with and which is never corrupted by sin. So we are not losing by our sinfulness this status. I need much more time for that, so I will not go on with this. I will only say that I was to finish the demands we need for a satisfactory inter-religious and intercultural, across-the-board understanding of human dignity. It has to apply to each and every human being, and it is not lost by mischief or worse. And what does it say then about a human being? It says about a human being, here I can just paraphrase you, it is a condition for our human rights, but also for our responsibility. So it is a condition for, or not a condition, yeah, a presupposition for self-respect and for respect of others. Everybody is included, all others, but also for self in this. So your quote of Heiner Bielefeld, which you said, it surprises me a little that he has said this just that way, but I fully agree, actually. He thinks that the doctrine of human dignity is a basis for human rights. But even saying so is not satisfactory. I plan to spend the coming 3 years of my life finding out how is exactly the proclamation and the status of embrace of the doctrine of human dignity, how does it give good grounds for support of human rights? And before I quit, I need to say something which makes me agree a little with the arrogant response given to Brett that he reported this morning by an American expert, a legal expert. No, he didn't want to come to the conference because dignity is such a loose thing. Remember? Something like that. I think it is very problematic to have a human right to dignity. Because you have a human right to decent living. You have a human right to decent medical service. You have a human right to decent school. That is very unsatisfactory, human rights language. Because it doesn't say anything informative to the judge exactly whether a human right was honored or not honored in a certain case. You need much more specific spelling out exactly what is a satisfactory level of education, or medical service, or old age pension, and so on. So I think that those lawyers who say that there is something unsatisfactory with dignity has a point. Namely, that human right to dignity is not what we are after. Dignity is the foundation of human rights. And in some cases, it is clear which rights they are violated, which rights they imply. The rights to non-torture, the rights to freedom of religion or belief, by the way. There are certain things which are so obviously a violation of human dignity that there's no problem for a judge. But in other cases, we have to take the trouble as creators of norms to spell it out. And that's what they did in the Eleanor Roosevelt's Commission, 47-48. They didn't say that we have a human right to dignity. It never says that, the Universal Declaration. It says, Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That's not a right. It's a principle. And I have always read, and I haven't found any counter-argument of the sentence, that it could even be said as to be an argument, an elliptic argument, as we say. Namely, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and hence in rights, based on dignity. A book where my next speaker is going to has made a very interesting chapter on the dignity of the family. In that book, there is lots of legal argument to the fact that there are problems with a human right to dignity. I agree. Not because dignity is not the foundation of human rights, but it is a foundation. It is not itself a specific right. This is up for discussion. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a poor old philosopher. But this is my understanding of this relationship between human dignity and human rights. They are separate and should be kept separate. How much time do I have left? Nothing?
Nothing.
Nothing. Very good. Then I'll just close by saying this. There is one good reason in this pursuit of ours to look into the history of the doctrine of dignity and the history of human rights. I said human rights begin after I was born, I mean in 45, not for that reason, but because the terrible, horrible war had come to an sort of end. Also, the history of dignity teaching is very interesting. And there we have to discover that there were some pioneers long, long before human rights were thought of, in the Stoic tradition, to the effect that, yes, we have this doctrine of dignity where you have high dignity and low dignity, the Pope, the archbishops, the priest, and the sort of the janitor, you know, or emperor, king. So there are social levels of ranks. But I think the most important idea of developing how to spell out in professional philosophy what human rights and what human dignity are with respect to human rights is done by Jeremy Waldron. So I just make an advertisement for a book for you. It is called One Another's Equals, The Basis of Human Equality. He's a Christian philosopher, and he argues that human dignity is the foundation of human rights. But there are lots of problems, and many of them we have not resolved. I shall not bother you with them at this time, but I just want to mention that they are not. It is not a question of clapping hands and being pious. It's a question of thinking and doing some analytic work. But by all means, clapping too. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. I'm very grateful, and I've enjoyed the panel presentations very much. I've never been on a panel with two Norwegian philosophers, so this is an exciting first for me. In my remarks today, I'm going to approach the question of the panel from the standpoint of contemporary natural law thought. And in the natural law approach, the understanding of both religious liberty and human dignity, I'm going to argue, are best approached by thinking about human goods. And so after first saying something about what religion is, I'll then discuss what kind of a good it is and how I see it as related to human dignity. So what is religion? I'll understand it here as the attempt to first find out the truth about whatever transcendent source of meaning and value there might or might not be, and second, to bring one's judgments, choices, actions, and indeed self into harmony with that source. So understood, religion is what I'll call a basic human good. It's also a good that requires adequate liberty for its successful pursuit. And finally, it's a good which can be pursued and promoted as a common good in community with others. So those are the 3 points that I'll take up first. First, is religion a good? Yes. I think responding to a wide variety of prompts, some involving the grandeur and regularity of nature, some involving our acute awareness of sin, tragedy, and the mystery of death, and yet others involving the exceptional nature of human reason and free choice. Human beings attempt to come to grips with their place in the cosmos and are led almost inevitably to the question of whether that place must be understood in relation to some greater than human source of meaning, value, and ultimately existence. And however that question is answered, human beings find it additionally desirable to make peace with that source, or to make their peace with the belief that there is no such source. If you come to the conclusion that there isn't one, then that is something that is sure to be unsettling, and you need to make peace with that as well. So, religion really is a good. It's desirable. It provides us with reasons for action. Are those reasons basic in such a way that we could then call this good a basic good, what I'm calling a basic good? That question can be answered by asking whether religion's value is merely instrumental in nature. Some human beings clearly do treat the good of religion as instrumental. They seek peace with their deities in order to manipulate them, in order to control nature and human destiny. They seek religion in order to control politics, in order to wield political power. But the fact that this good can be pursued for instrumental reasons does not show that it is not also of intrinsic value. And indeed, it seems true that many agents do pursue religious truth and harmony with the object of that truth simply for its own sake, because we recognize that such awareness and harmony are good as such. So the opportunity to achieve such harmony, it presents itself to reasonable agents as intrinsically valuable. In the same way, we see people who treat friendship as merely transactional, as merely instrumental for other purposes. But that doesn't prevent us from also recognizing that there's something good as such in having friends. And I'll come back to this analogy with friendship a couple of times. So that's first, religion is a basic good. Second, the good of religion requires free acts on our own part. So again, with friendship, just as one cannot be made to be another's friend, but can only be a friend freely, so one cannot really be in harmony with the divine unless one recognizes oneself that there is a being to be in harmony with, and really chooses to be in that harmony. And so we see the need for freedom built into the nature and value of religion. So religion seems to be first a basic good, which can be pursued for its own sake, and second, a good which requires adequate liberty to be successfully pursued. But third, religion is also clearly a common good, shareable and shared amongst all beings with the common personal nature that human beings possess. Human persons who recognize this good as giving themselves basic reasons for action recognize that this very same good likewise gives reasons for action for other persons, other human beings like themselves. They recognize that other human persons will be benefited by successful pursuit of this good. They recognize that good is providing shared reasons or reasons for shared action, and thus is providing a matrix for genuine cooperation. And similarly, if they're reasonable, they recognize that the need for freedom, which underwrites their own relation to the good of religion, must also be available to those others if they're to successfully pursue this good as well. Now let me digress for a moment to ask, what about atheists? I think that atheists also can be understood as pursuing this good if they have indeed carried out an honest search for the transcendent source of meaning and goodness in the universe, judged that such a source does not exist, and existentially come to terms with that absence. Nevertheless, I think that it's a matter of reason, and indeed public reason, not private revelation, that even though those atheists are pursuing the good of religion, nevertheless, their pursuit of that good is deficient if it is also a matter of public reason that there is indeed a transcendent source of goodness. For their existential decisions are, in that case, founded upon a significant error. Now, I'll assume here that it is a matter of public reason that there does exist such a transcendent being, and I'll refer to that being as God throughout. While those who do recognize the existence of God and who pursue harmony with that being are so far forth better off, it seems to me, as regards this good than those who deny the existence of God, even among those who believe in God, there is surely room for qualitative discrimination. Some conceptions of God's nature and of what is required of being in harmony with God are incompatible with others. They can't all be correct or true. And just as being in harmony with your friend requires correctly understanding her character, so does being in full harmony with the divine require correct understanding of God's character. And just as being in harmony with your friend requires recognition and understanding of her attempts to communicate with you, so does being in harmony with the divine require recognition and understanding of God's attempts to communicate. And some putative revelations of this being, it seems to me, are incompatible with others in terms of the picture of God that they present, the nature of that being with whom you're invited to be in harmony. Those who have rightly identified some alleged communication as true revelation of the divine are thus enabled to have a more adequate relationship with the divine. But, and here's the reason that I raise these points, right? We shouldn't accept religious indifferentism. I think competing religious claims are truth claims, and they can't all be true, right? And so some are superior to others if they're not all bad. But one can accept these claims without denying the need for freedom of religion for those whom one believes to have a less adequate understanding than oneself. The same point about religion being a good, and indeed a basic good, and of liberty being a condition for its pursuit and for its realization still apply even for a conception of God and a religion that you think is not as adequate as your own to a relationship with God. Now, to return to my claim that religion can be a common good, the shared nature of this good, the importance of making correct judgments and choices as regards this good's object, that is God, and many instances of possible divine communication, suggest that the attempt to pursue such a harmony with God should be carried out in a cooperative way, by agents bound together, first, by shared beliefs about the existence, nature, and revelation of such a being, and about the proper way to relate to that being, and second, by common traditions, for example, of worship, by third, often by quasi-political structures of authority. When you get people together, there needs to be something like a politics for them, and so there need to be common ways of operating and common forms of authority. And D, often, less clearly political forms of authority, such as come with a claim to inspiration. I guess not D, that was 4. I went from A to 4. Moreover, such agents should believe that the demands made upon them by the need for harmony encompass large parts of their lives. Such agents thus typically work together not just to maintain belief in worship, but also to more broadly structure their lives around such activities, such as charitable endeavors that put them in the right relationship with the divine. These are also social cooperative acts that believers engage in. So not just religion comprising at a minimum belief in worship, but also typically other activities, but also cooperative, collective, or communal religion, the belief, worship, and action of believers together, all these are essential to the well-being of human persons. All require liberty for their successful realization. And so the state, I think, rightly takes both a positive and negative interest in the good of religion. The interest is negative insofar as a reasonable state recognizes that, to be authentic, religious belief, worship, and action, and religious cooperation cannot, as I've noted, be coerced. This is the essential core of the right to religious liberty. The reasonable political community protects by law freedom of religious worship and abstains from establishment of any coercive form of state worship. Similarly, the reasonable political community prevents, to the degree possible, private coercion, protecting, for example, the right of exit from religious institutions and prohibiting more than disciplinary forms of punishment within religious institutions. The interest of the state is positive in that the reasonable political community, I think, would look benevolently on its citizens' sincere attempts at piety and aid them in ways that were fair and non-coercive to others. Here, the right to religious freedom goes beyond its core in ways that I think are nevertheless internal to that right's logic. One example, policies favoring school choice for parents, religious parents who wish to send their children to parochial schools or even to homeschool them, are not demanded by the principle of immunity from coercion that is at the core of the right to religious liberty. But I think that a reasonable political community should make an effort to support these forms of schooling. Now on to dignity. The preceding has been just a bare sketch of a justification for religious freedom. But the notion of human dignity hasn't received a word yet. Is the sketch compatible with the justification for a right to religious freedom that makes reference to human dignity and that's compatible with the protection of human dignity for all? I think that it is. Dignity, traditionally, is an excellence of some sort. And human dignity in the central sense is the excellence of being a person with the capacity for reasoned choice. But the horizon of all reasoned choice is precisely the framework of the variety of basic human goods that give persons their reasons for action. So dignity is intrinsically linked to the goods whose protection sets the parameters of our most fundamental rights, goods that include not just religion, but also human life, and hence a right to life, work, friendship, marriage, just to name a few. Failure to acknowledge, or worse, attempts deliberately to damage any one of these goods is thus additionally a failure to acknowledge and respect human dignity. Indeed, the link between dignity and human goods is essential to providing adequate content to the norm that human dignity should be protected. Dignity is sometimes understood merely in terms of the human capacity to be self-determining, with no further account of the orientation of this capacity towards what is genuinely fulfilling for human agents who have this capacity to be self-determining. What must be protected on these accounts is simply the bare capacity, however it is exercised, so long as it does not coercively interfere with the exercise of that same capacity in others. Protection of human dignity might thus require, for example, protecting the right to choose death in physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia. By recognizing that the horizon of authentic self-determination is in basic human goods such as human life, however, a goods-based approach has within it resources to resist appeals to dignity that fail to distinguish between what is life-affirming and thus truly protective of human dignity and what is life-denying and opposed to dignity. Because these human goods, these basic human goods are, like the capacities for freedom and reason, also in a sense excellent, we may likewise refer to the dignity of these goods. We can talk about the dignity of human life, the dignity of knowledge, the dignity of marriage, the dignity of religion. This extension of the language of dignity, I think, is helpful. Articulating the nature of and need for a right to religious liberty should work with the idea that there is dignity both in the person and in the good. For if there's no actual good to be found in religious belief and practice, then religious belief or in liberty, religious liberty rather, will begin to look like a perhaps unnecessary concession to crazy or at least seriously misguided people whose capacity for self-determination has gone astray in some way or perhaps isn't even being genuinely exercised at all. If you genuinely can't recognize the good in religious liberty, it's unclear how you can recognize a right to religious liberty or recognize the idea that religious liberty is central to the idea of human dignity. And that attitude, I think, is not a promising one for the promotion of religious liberty, and neither is it one that genuinely respects human dignity. The notion of dignity can also help us to articulate some important dimensions of the right to religious liberty. The dignity of persons and the good of persons sets both ethical and political requirements and tasks. The requirement aspect is captured in phrases such as a violation of my dignity or an offense against my dignity or the dignity of so-and-so. In such cases, requirements on others to protect or respect our human dignity have gone unfulfilled. That there should be robust respect for religious liberty in a society is a requirement, both ethical and political, of the dignity of the person and the dignity of religion. The task, what I'm calling the task aspect, is captured in the forms of reproach and self-accusation we engage in sometimes when we say that my actions were beneath my dignity, right? Or our actions were beneath us in some way. to indicate that some person or group, usually ourselves, has failed to live up to the demands that their own dignity makes on them. And here I think I would see an overlap with the idea that there are responsibilities, not just rights, with dignity. The ethical task of dignity, where religion is concerned, includes demands that agents pursuing that good not use their pursuit as a disguise for the quest for, among other things, political domination or manipulation of others. It includes the demand that they recognize and respect that which in other people also involves pursuit of the same good, even in what are perceived to be erroneous ways. There is still a lot to respect in the pursuit of religion carried out by persons with whom you profoundly disagree. And it includes the demand that they not be, that is, we, one, myself, not be blindly faithful, so utterly unquestioning as to allow one's faith to bring one to violations and offenses against other basic goods, such as human life. Such limits of religious liberty are internal to the dignity of religion viewed in its task aspect. The political task of dignity includes the creation and maintenance of a society in which this ethical standpoint is fostered, and in which grievous violations of it are checked for the sake of the common good, including the religious liberty of others. While the content of this task obviously overlaps to a considerable extent with the requirements of the dignity of the person and the dignity of religion, the task concept should be understood from the perspective of a society asking the practical question, what sort of a people should we be? Whereas the requirement concept can be understood in terms of that same society asking, what are others, including our own citizens, owed by us? So the language of dignity is fundamentally tied, in my view, to the language of human goods. Each complements the other in the attempt to deliberate and articulate the results of those deliberations about the right to religious freedom. And those who, like myself, believe that religious liberty is currently under grave threat worldwide, will likewise agree that the task of providing an adequate justification for religious freedom is only part of the solution to the problem of religious persecution and intolerance, and perhaps only a minor part. It's probably the case that stories do more work than philosophy. But intellectual error can have enormous consequences. In much of the world, error about the implications of religion's claims to truth, error involving the true claim that different religions make truth claims and hence can't all be correct, have generated errors about the permissibility of coerced conversion, religious and ethnic cleansing. In the West, a different set of errors predicated on the denial of religious truth is in part responsible for a growing belief that religion deserves public opprobrium and should be no part of our public life. For those motivated by these beliefs in either cultural context, clarity is needed about the nature of the good of religion and the moral implications of acknowledging that goodness. Only, I think, an approach that begins with a discourse on the goodness of religion will do. But such an approach leads naturally, and is not at all antithetic to, a complementary discourse on the importance of human dignity. Such a complementary approach is essential, I believe, to protecting both religious freedom and human dignity of all. Thank you.
We probably have time for 2 questions before our break. All right. Do we have? Yes, go ahead.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Florentín Meléndez, soy abogado de El Salvador y he escuchado muy atentamente sus presentaciones, son muy ilustrativas sobre el concepto, el fundamento, el contenido y el alcance de la dignidad humana. Y han hecho mucho.
Why don't you wait till we put on our earphones?
Perdón.
You're the only one. Is there someone in the room?
Someone
who
could
can
translate for us, I believe,
us?
Why don't you get Christopher a headphone?
Go ahead.
Please.
Muy bien. Sí, repito, mi nombre es Florentín Meléndez, soy de El Salvador, soy abogado y he escuchado con mucha atención las exposiciones muy ilustrativas sobre la dignidad humana, que es un tema filosófico, religioso, político, pero tiene un fuerte enfoque de derechos humanos. un profundo enfoque de derechos humanos. Y se ha insistido mucho en las libertades, que van en el camino correcto que nos lleva hacia la dignidad humana. Y dentro de ellas la libertad religiosa. Se ha hablado del libre albedrío, de la autodeterminación, de la autonomía y las distintas libertades. Creo que es correcto el enfoque, pero es parcial, según mi modesto punto de vista. Creo que también, y de igual manera, deberíamos de insistir en que el fundamento, el contenido esencial de la dignidad humana también recae en la igualdad traducida en equidad, tratando en cuenta las diferencias y la diversidad entre los seres humanos. Libertad e igualdad entonces se convierten en el contenido esencial de la dignidad humana desde la perspectiva de los derechos humanos. Eso lo mencionó el señor Torre al parafrasear la Declaración Universal en el artículo 1, que todas las personas o todos los seres humanos nacemos libres e iguales en dignidad y derechos. Pero esto no es nuevo de 1948, esto tiene su arrastre histórico, su enfoque histórico con las declaraciones del siglo de la Ilustración. La misma declaración del Buen Pueblo de Virginia y de 1776 y posteriormente la Declaración Francesa de los Derechos del Hombre y del Ciudadano de 1789 van en la misma línea de la Declaración Universal, planteando que todos los seres humanos nacen libres e iguales en dignidad y derechos. Por lo tanto, el enfoque liberal y el enfoque social de los derechos humanos insisten en que los principios de libertad e igualdad son el contenido esencial de la dignidad humana. Yo creo que esto nos da respuesta a las dudas que se puedan plantear sobre cuál es el rol de las iglesias, cuál es el rol de las universidades, cuál es el rol de los abogados, cuál es el rol de la sociedad civil para conquistar una vida digna y más humana en la actualidad. Luchar por una libertad ejercida responsablemente, pero también tratar de crear condiciones de vida igualitarias, equitativas, para que no haya pobreza, marginación social, exclusión social. Por lo tanto, creo que los derechos de libertad y los derechos de igualdad forman parte del contenido y del núcleo esencial de la dignidad humana. Esa es mi participación. No sé qué opinión les merece esta modesta reflexión.
Tor, would you give us a rundown of that question?
Sorry?
Did you
Yes, I got, yes.
Okay, Christopher, give us a rundown, first of all, of what the question was.
So the question had to do with the relationship of human equality to dignity
Okay.
and religious liberty. And I'll just say two very quick things and then pass it on to you. I think that's an excellent question, and I'll take it from two angles. One, following up on the questioner, I do think that one of the values of religion, certainly of certain religions, is that they give us a very short route, especially the Abrahamic religions, give us a very short route to the claim that dignity is equal in all human beings, a claim that you made as well. Right? That seems to be part of the Abrahamic tradition's teachings. On the view that I tried to lay out about human goods, right, equality is also important because the basic goods that I spoke of are basic human goods. And the path towards awareness of the extent of the reach of those goods and the implications they have for human beings and for our obligations to others, right, is a path of ever-widening recognition of those beings that are included within the scope of those goods. And I think that the boundaries of that are the boundaries of the human species. All human beings, every single human being is a being that is made better off by their participation in those basic human goods. And so those goods need to be protected in every single human being. There's no possible exclusion, right, starting from the standpoint that I outlined of basic goods and its relationship to human dignity.
And I can be even shorter. I fully welcome your intervention, and I fully subscribe to everything you said as a position. But actually, I have the same question to my, what's your name, Christopher?
Yes.
Yeah, because if dignity is an excellence of some sort, how about people who are brain dead? How about people who have lost their any force? I think there are people, there are persons, there are human beings, in my view, with dignity, given by God, by grace, but the excellence. Could you explicate the excellence of the brain dead? I mean, I'm not joking. I'm just trying. There is a difficulty there, and I just may add this: that Immanuel Kant, who has a wonderful theory for atheists, he didn't really namely this fantastic thing of the human being, this nominal human being, such that you have really moral autonomy, freedom. And I think Kant made for himself problems he didn't have because he believed too much superstitiously in Newton about determinism and so on. But how about Kant and similar with him? How about people who don't have this minimum autonomy? It is a challenge to people who have some natural law, I think, or the natural capacity of the human being. So I'm now advertising on overtime that it is actually a relational. We are equal because we all relate to our Creator. That is a Christian way of doing it. But you have to, please say something about.
Ganoon had a comment too. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just would like to make two remarks very, very briefly. One, and connected to your presentation. When I mentioned the idea of an overlapping consensus, it meant precisely we are not just limiting ourselves to a tradition, be it Christian. The concept of dignity, the reason why I mentioned that it's a mystery. A mystery is not something you cannot know anything about. A mystery is something you cannot know everything about. And we discover in interfaith dialogue, for example, that the idea of dignity is present. Hinduism, for example, they call their religion Sanatana Dharma. So Sanatana Dharma, they call it everlasting righteousness and so forth. But the idea is for Hindus or adherent of this path, or path plural, is that the Brahman reside in the Atman. So that's why even when Hindu greet one another, they will say, Namaste, from your grace, from what is dignified in you. So we find the idea of dignity in Hinduism, and the same we can talk about Buddhism. The idea of wisdom, compassion, and harmlessness are all connected to the idea of dignity. And then when we mention Immanuel Kant precisely, it is possible to articulate the idea of dignity in purely secular terms, not necessarily, connected to a given religion or philosophy of life. So this is the reason why I'm thinking, even having this conversation, right, takes us further into the mystery. And one last thought. I think we are making progress as a human family to understand that dignity transcends even the idea of excellence. In a sense, like someone who is disabled or not being able to function at the same level as other people, still, because of this inner worth or conscience, can also fully participate in this humanity, in this idea of human dignity. And I think, yes, we are, as human family, I believe we are making progress in continuing the conversation, not limiting dignity to past attribution of some merits, for example, or some excellence. So anyway, I wanted to just mention this, that we are moving forward in that sense. That's why I really deeply welcome conversation that help us better respect the mystery of others. I mean, and of course, as a Christian, I can say, if I truly believe that God created humans and that there is something sacred in human beings, so who am I to intrude in that relationship, try to judge, to confine, define people? I have to let people be and believe differently. So it's possible to believe differently while collaborating at a human level because precisely of the intersections of values.
Okay. Thank you very much, panel members. And let's give them a round of applause, please.
This is a good case of
We will
questions and you answer.